today I'm talking to Lynn, who we're going to be talking about leaders, heroes and hierarchy. And this was kind of sparked off by the Joey Armstrong comment about basically how he started the whole animal rights movement. And Lynn has been involved far, far longer than me in animal rights. So I was just wondering if you give a bit of a background on, how long you've been involved in the movement and any other kinds of activism you've done.
Yeah, I became involved in the animal rights movement sort of 1994. I'm ex-hunt. I used to hunt and I used to work on farms. And I began to speak out against what I'd seen and also what I'd done. And I became vegan at that time. I became a SAB. I've done anti-vivisection stuff. I've done climate camp. I've been at quite a few Earth First gatherings and learned a lot from those. A lot of sabbing, a lot of the badger curl. I've been involved in Amnesty International, people getting muddy in fields, a few lock-ons. I've been quite arrested quite a few times, been very badly injured once on an action. So run-of-the-mill stuff, really. I know you said I've been around quite a bit. There are people who've been around twice as long as I have. So there are lots of veterans. It's not that unusual to find people around who've been involved a very long time. I know SABs who started sabbing in the 60s. There are activists in our community that have been activists since the 50s and 60s. So they're still around, they're still out there, they're still doing stuff.
I've only been vegan for about, 7 years now. I can never remember the year. And like yourself, I was involved in different forms of activism, but less hands-on, more sort of like human rights and environmental in majority world countries, like India and Thailand. And when I became vegan, I was overseas and I started an activism group after the first year. And that was kind of quite interesting because being in a different country, there are different sort of like ways of doing things. And one of the reasons I came back to the UK was to get more stuck into the vegan movement. And from overseas, the perspective I got of, what was going on in the UK was like all these really sort of like active people doing amazing things. I'd sort of like see stuff on YouTube with like Earthling Ed and James Aspey and Joey Armstrong, and I'd be like, wow, there's so much going on. It's great. And then I arrived here in the UK and started to meet people and did a few sort of like saves and the odd cube and stuff like that. And after a while, I was a bit sort of confused about what was going on, and my views sort of like changed over the few years. I know that's a couple of years basically. To is there actually a vegan movement? And I know and that's why and most of the people that I know are not long-term activists like yourself. They sort of literally, I keep on meeting people and they've just gone vegan, or they've been vegan for a year, or maybe somebody's been vegan for 5 years. They're like,
there's a lot more face-to-face mixing with all the newer vegans.
Yeah, and most of them are new, very, very recent, so I've got a very different perspective. And one of the, we met at Veg Fest, and one of the reasons I was fascinated by, your contributions, because of the long-termedness of your involvement and the fact you do know these, vegans who go back to the year dot. So how did you feel when Joey Armstrong came out with a statement of, started the vegan movement?
2018. But it doesn't surprise me actually, because I have seen some stuff, on other pages, and other people have been saying similar things. Almost like a bubble where needs bursting. If he'd said something along the lines of everything was crap before I came along, but people had done stuff but it was crap, that would have been one thing. That would have been an opinion. But he almost stated it as that, I was the first to bring ethical animal rights into the media. And I was just thinking of all the before I got involved, there was all the live export demos,
And when would that
the
have been? When would that
would have been
been?
the early 90s.
The early
There's been hundreds of brilliant campaigns that have been plastered all over the press internationally. The death of Jill Phipps, the death of Barry Horn, Jack, all of that, and loads of other stuff. And you know, when you come into this movement, there is a rich history. And the more you dig, the more you find. It's huge. There's and you can go right back. I think Richard Ryder wrote a book called Animal Revolution, and in that book you can find people who were active against hunts, several hundred years ago. There's a book called The Heretic's Feast by Colin Spencer, and he details vegetarianism right back as far as he can, and you're talking about the early Christians, you're talking about the Cathars, and a lot of these people were persecuted, tortured and killed for their beliefs because they wouldn't eat meat.
I mean, that's news to me, and I thought I was like reasonably well informed on the sort of like the history of veganism. So I think that's humbling for me and heartening as well at the same time.
Of course, history is written by the victors, isn't it? And vegans weren't the victors, generally speaking. And also, it wasn't called veganism. That was coined by the Vegan Society, the early Vegan Society in the 40s. I think it was Donald Watson. But before then, people were vegan. There is a Victorian vegan recipe book. So there was something called the Black Fast. The Middle Ages, and the Black Fast was more or less a vegan diet, and it was one of the things they looked for in witchcraft.
So then when you sort of like heard this thing from Joe Armstrong, what was your sort of like, was it just like a sigh? Because I mean, that was, when we sort of like caught up, it was like, that was something that I thought would be really good to hear your views on that because of your history with activism.
I think I had a little chuckle to myself and just thought, oh dear, he's sort of like, he needs to come down to earth, is what I thought. I just thought, well, it doesn't look good, does it? It just looks like he doesn't know what he's talking about. It looks as though he's right up his own arse. I do think it's something in today's society that people have to say they're the first to do something or the best at something, instead of just doing something and saying, I'm good, you're good. Hey, that was a really good banner you did there, banner drop you did there, great, and you try and encourage one another. It's a competition. It's almost like a competition. Yeah, I was the first to do that. Yeah, and it's just like, why do that? I recognise that this movement goes back decades. I recognise that people were trashing about grouse butts in the mid 19th century, and the rich history. People have died protecting non-human animals. They've given their lives for it. And I think the first person in recently recorded history was an RSPCA inspector who was killed by dog fighters, and that was in the 19th century.
Really?
So, yeah. So it's just like you've got this really rich, vibrant history, and it's just why hide that from people? He has actually interviewed on podcasts, a couple of individuals who are long-term. They're long-term activists, so he has actually interviewed people longer term than I am. So I'm not quite sure what the game is.
Concern about it is that a lot of the more recent vegans, the sort that maybe sort of they go to the cubes or the saves, or perhaps they, just on the sort of like ethical side and not doing any activism so far, they will not be aware of this. And especially the ones that really take on the sort of the Joeys and the Eds and the James Aspies as like the hero figures of the movement, and which is how they've all portrayed themselves, isn't it? And the movement, as it were, kind of a segment of the movement, perhaps.
Like two different movements. It's like
yes, it is, isn't it? Yeah, That's what
I won't say
I
necessarily. I won't say necessarily new people, because I know people have been involved a year or two, have been vegan a year or two, and they've got that fully sort of like the same approach as the old, the older movement would have, especially in sabbing, I think. But I think it's really sad in a way that there's not more crossover. It's almost like this new movement or this new thing has popped up, and it's like we're not welcome. We're like we should shuffle off somewhere, and not be seen or heard from.
Not selfie friendly.
No.
Your concept of two movements is exactly right, but where does that leave the people who are sort of less aware and perhaps new, and perhaps they would like to be aware, but then these sort of figures that they've adopted as their heroes, and I think it is quite gendered, they're saying stuff like, started in 2018. And a lot of people just take things at face value, weren't they? And then that really but reinforces the heroic status of Joey, doesn't it? I mean, that's the thing. It sort of like reinforces him as this lone person fighting for the animals.
Yeah, I saw another podcast by here in Bashir. There's only a handful of people that do full-time activism.
Oh no.
And it was just like, no, that's not, who, but they're talking about themselves and how they need self-care, but nobody else does. It's like a lot of people are not aware of the history of McDonald's. I think very famously, there's James Aspey doing his come to bed pose on some sort of sheets somewhere and just saying, I don't know why people don't like McDonald's, something to do with workers' rights or something, I don't know. There was the MacLillian campaign, I don't know if you've heard.
Oh God, yes, yeah. Franny Armstrong.
A lot of people aren't, they're just like, well, what's that? And you're just like, well, the fact you can hand out leaflets against the meat industry now is because of Helen Steele and Dave Morris, and the fact that they would not apologise to McDonald's for talking about the rainforest, workers' rights, animals being killed, and they were just leafleting. They were leafleting outside McDonald's in a very peaceful way, and they were taken to libel court by the corporation. I think it's the longest civil case in British history.
It was years, wasn't it?
Just went on for years.
And they won. They won.
All over the press.
Yeah, they won several bits.
Was all over the press.
Yeah,
and that was in the 90s.
And there was that film about it, wasn't it? MacLillian, I think it was. It's definitely a film about it by Franny Armstrong. So, but what do you think is the? Do you think there's a danger to the sort of hero aspect to the movement? Because I find it quite at the beginning, as I said, I was like, oh, these people are doing these amazing talks, and it didn't really cross my mind that they all seemed, well, all three of them basically seemed to be guys. But now I think it's like it's all horribly gendered. Being heroes is really inappropriate, and that if this is supposed to be a movement, why aren't they encouraging people to actually join up and organise stuff rather than just donate to my Patreon account? I mean, that's my position.
Coordinated the Badger Cull in Gloucestershire. We tried to. Some people like structure, and they like to be. Some people wanted to be told, go and stand over there and do this and do that. Other people wanted to do their own thing, and they were perfectly capable of doing so. So that's great, Other people needed to learn some skills, and we learned from other. You learn. It's a two-way thing. You learn from one another. And then that person can do whatever it is that you then do. That is the issue. You should be trying to bring people skill levels up and learn things yourself. The problem is, it's sort of this attitude is that they're up here and we're all down here. And that's problematic on several levels. Well, first of all, the hero will end up being thrown in the gutter sooner or later. What we need is as many people as possible, and as many communities as possible, and as many workplaces as possible, churches, whatever, getting there and normalising veganism.
I think that's key. to get the communities, sort of like communities of people, whatever that community is, and whether you start a community or whether you're part of a community, to organize and do stuff as groups, you know, and not to rely on these sort of like saints, you know, Saint James of Aspie or whatever, to do the work for us. Because I think my own take on that is it encourages a culture of passivity amongst, you know, people who might otherwise be able to be a bit more sort of active, because they're like, oh well, I could never do a great amazing talk like that, I couldn't go to Bali and, you know, do whatever they do, or I couldn't go to Israel and do
I couldn't go on a cruise for
I
6
couldn't
weeks.
do that. No, like, you know, I couldn't have a patronic.
I could actually, no, not really.
I wouldn't want to. But the thing is, you know, I think a lot of the ordinary sort of like vegan on the street who might be encouraged, could be actually, people are encouraged, can be encouraged into doing stuff. But the hero culture has the opposite effect. I think it's very disempowering for people. And it also...
Very disempowering, yeah.
And
the best thing you can do is, I'm really crap at computers, I'm really crap at technology. And the best thing you can do with me is sit me down and show me what to do, and then it's sort of in there, in the abyss of my brain, you know, somewhere. But if somebody's just there, oh, I'll do that, you know, it's just, oh yeah, great, all I've got to do is go, you know, yell and somebody comes and does it. That's great, that is, I don't have to do anything. Fantastic. And it's basically abdicating your responsibility as an activist.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've got no problem at all with people wishing to join, especially if they're new, joining a group, learning about stuff. If they're new to activism, it might be really good if they're leafleting or joining a cube or whatever they want to do, really. But it doesn't have to stop there. You know, let's be creative. People come out with new ideas all the time, you know, and build on what's already there. That's what we need.
Well, I think that's interesting, because it's sort of become quite formulaic, hasn't it? A lot of people, the newer people in particular, seem to think that, you know, activism is cubes or saves, or what is it?
Meet the victims.
Meet the victims, or maybe a march. You know, and they think that is
activism. Oh yeah, march is right.
Yeah. And that's all signing petitions, and all that's going to work. And, you know, we've got an infinite amount of time, and, you know, tra la la la. They don't understand that, you know, there is a lot of other forms, as you say, like the stabbing and all the badger cull and all that sort of stuff. But plus, people can just invent their new ways of activism or learn from other sort of like struggles.
Videos that people are putting up. Some of them are excellent, some are really good. Some of Joey's are really good, actually. Bite-sized vegan, absolutely brilliant. And some of our things, Ed's are very, very good. I think the way YouTube has been used has been good on some levels, but it's when people are portraying themselves as a brand, you know, that's problematic on many different levels. You know, and also the other thing is, quite a few vegan influencers have actually decided to stop being vegan.
I think that's the whole thing of when you've got these sort of, you know, this culture is built on sort of like notion of sort of, one of the notions is role models and inspiration, rather than sort of like think for yourself, do your own research and figure it all out. And when people are reliant on a role model or something, and the role model then, as you say, decides to sort of like change their tune, I think it's not helpful and it really sort of mitigates against being taken seriously as a social justice movement, which is really the way that veganism needs to be sort of going forward, I think.
Absolutely. And to my mind, it always has been. The Hunt Saboteurs Association are affiliated to Antifa, for example, you know, so there is crossover. There is, we've all done climate camp. We've all been on the, you know, I know many animal rights activists who've locked on at, you know, on climate actions and stuff like that. And I find it absolutely bizarre when people say, oh, it's not about the environment. Well, the environment is air, water, earth, pollution, all things that kill non-human animals. So how can the environment not be an animal rights issue?
what do you think would be the solution to, the whole sort of Joey, that kind of phenomenon? Because I think the other thing is that we haven't really covered so far is the whole genderedness of it. That, what is it, 65 or 70% of vegans, I think, or certainly the majority, are basically women or female, and that the ones that are held up as the role models are, guys, young guys as well. I obviously find that a sort of kind of massive issue, and again disempowering to women.
Yeah, very much so. And there's a lot of concerns about some guys using their status to be less than honourable. Sexual assaults.
Yeah.
I think we're in a real mess right now with this. And a way forward is more discussions online about how we deal with this, and together in person, and more workshops, etc. More writing, more brainstorming. We cannot have a movement where people do not feel safe with their own, with people on their side. If you're on a cube or something, you don't want to feel you're going to be sexually assaulted, or in a sab van, you don't want to feel you're going to be sexually assaulted or bullied. What sort of society do we want? What are we aiming for? And we can have everyone vegan, eating a vegan diet, and still have small children putting together, going through rubbish, getting little bits of metal to put on our phones. That's not a vegan world, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I think that's absolutely key. I mean, what you're talking about is the whole, the linkedness of oppressions, whether it's sexism or racism or, class or, the capitalist system. That's really fundamentally, I think, what you're kind of like getting at. And it's all about power. It's all about the dynamics of power. And I think this is the issue when people are sort of like, when you've got the vegan so-called movement, which is effectively sort of like reflecting the entrenched power structures, i.e., white male dominated, and they've also got money as well, like loads of money on Patreon and stuff like that. It's not healthy. It's not creating an alternative world. It's just reiterating. It's a slightly tweaked version of what's going on. And if that doesn't change, if we don't change it in the movement, which we need to do by self-education, discussion, and, as you say, reading, consciousness raising, that sort of stuff, how on earth can we expect to create a new world for animals, non-human beings? Because it's all linked. That's the thing. It's all linked. It's not like, oh, I'm vegan for the animal, that's it, job done. It's impossible. It's just crazed if you think about it. That's why we need to be sort of like educating ourselves. So that's my
there's no depth. There's no depth. Comment the other day, I think it was along the lines of the corporations have got this regarding bringing veganism to the masses, and you're like, corporations are doing it because they're making a load of money. There is, for many years, there's been small vegan companies and cooperatives. Plamil was the first plant milk founded by Arthur Ling, and they came out with the first soy milks, the first soy mayonnaise, the first soy chocolate, the first vegan chocolate, etc. And we should we should try and support these companies. It's now going to the supermarkets. It's now going to these big multinationals. Now they're seeing there's profit to be made. They're all over it.
Yeah, they're seeing it as profitable, but the majority of their income, if you're talking about the multinational corporations, whether it's McDonald's, Tesco's, or whoever, in the majority of their income and profits is still going to be coming from unethical, often related to sort of like animal use industries, so it's this is why people need to sort of basically sort of like educate themselves. Apart from the education that we've talked about, can you see any other way forward that you would think was effective? We've talked about educating, we've talked about self-educating, raising awareness, consciousness, discussions. organising perhaps in communities. I wonder if people should be having conversations with the Eds and the Joeys and...
I think so. I don't see why not. I think they don't seem to be too... I've heard people say that they've tried talking to them and haven't got anywhere. But I've looked at the Anonymous for the Voiceless videos that they've put up in the last couple of days. And yeah, it seems they've had a think about what they've been saying, and that's good. The thing is, if they want to do things in a certain way, that's one thing. I think them portraying themselves as this is what the animal rights movement is, this is what veganism is, and people going along with that, that's the problem. Because they don't get to define what the entire movement is. It isn't up to them. They can define what AV is or whatever, that's fine. They can do what they like, but they shouldn't be saying get out of our lane, or you lot go away, because we define what animal rights is. That's just a ridiculous thing to say.
Well, what they should be saying is like mentioning, like, oh, I read this amazing book, like you said, by, what was it, Richard Ryder, Animal Revolution, or, what about Tom Regan, who's often considered, to be, one of the great ways, was a philosopher, one of the great, who coined basically the terms animal rights.
He's a nice guy. I remember him trying to get us singing at one gathering. It didn't really work very well. He was trying to get us all singing and clapping and stuff.
The vegans on the street, the new ones should be like questioning things, questioning, do we want these leaders? Do we want these hero figures, or are we actually going to create a new world, a new and different world without the linked oppressions of gender, race, and all the other oppressions, including the animal oppressions, obviously. So, yeah, any last thoughts before we sort of wind up?
I was a midwife, I'm not anymore. But there was a term called autonomous practitioner. And the general thing is you work with others, you organise with others, but the buck stops with you. The buck stops with you. So, and I think that's a good way to be. We should all be endeavouring to think outside the box and think about what we're doing and is it right, and people not being afraid to speak out either, and debate and discuss, and yeah, we need to be aiming for that.
So maybe what we should be, one of the things we could be doing, apart from sort of encouraging, all the vegans that we meet to discuss these sort of like issues, is, as I said, maybe sort of like get somebody like Joey or whatever to have a bit of a chat about these sort of issues. What did you mean?
Cool, yeah.
Why not?
I don't think he would.
Well, it doesn't matter whether he would or he wouldn't, but I mean, it's kind of interesting either way, really, whatever was said. It's not about putting somebody on the spot, but I think, it's just like, I think it's kind of quite informative, but it's not the only thing, it's not the major thing, but it's a kind of maybe a fun little aside. The major work is, as you say, the buck stops with us, the individuals who are not yet activists, who are maybe pre-activists, who could be sort of like encouraged, brought on to become activists in amazing ways, because there is a war on all animals, all other animals, it's ongoing, and there is a huge sense of urgency, certainly from my position, and we all need to gather together to stop the war on animals, and that's the only way that it will stop, is when we all do gather together effectively to organise, not relying on heroes to lead.
We need animal rights communities to be safe, and they're not currently.
Maybe that's something that we could talk about, or that can be talked about in future conversations, because these conversations need to be had, rather than conversations about the newest sort of like veggie burger, or the newest sort of like ice cream, or in Tesco's that's vegan or something. We need to be having these kind of conversations where people do feel encouraged. So yeah, I think it's been really helpful for me talking with you. It's been great. I've learned a lot. So hopefully we can have another conversation at some point in the not too distant future, and figure out some more truths about animal rights. Lynn, thank you so much for your time today.
I think your cat's got lots to say as well.
She is, yes, she's really on one today. I don't really know why. It's her dinner time actually, so I need to go and
Okay, cool. All right, bye, Pamela.
All right, bye.